Welcome to the sixth segment of our ROTAX Builder series, following the build of a Zenair Zenith CH750 powered by a 912 IS fuel-injected engine. In this episode, our ROTAX Technical Expert discusses the very first 912 IS powered CH750 with Zenith test pilot Roger Dubbert.
So if you look through the top here, this is the fuse box. The design team went through a lot of changes through the testing process because meeting the maximum temperature requirements of the engine was somewhat of a challenge. Again, trying to design a cooling system that's not creating a lot of drag and yet is meeting your design goals can be somewhat of a challenge. This fuse box was located in 5 different locations in the engine bay until it was finally put into a place and we were able to duct air to it to get it to operate within the required temperature limitations. Each item that you see here is put in its location for a very good reason. For example, as you can see on this side here, the oil lines and fuel lines are very neatly run. Lines have a bit of slack. One of the other considerations the design team had to look at was crashworthiness. In the event of an unfortunate mishap, you want to make sure that you don't breach a fuel line or an oil line and create a fire hazard. And so there was a lot of consideration given to that aspect, location of sediment traps, how the lines enter through the firewall, proper fire sleeving, proper fittings and connections, good bracketry to hold everything, and yet everything is allowed some wiggle room and you look at what it takes in the event of distortion. Will you shear off something so you allow for adequate clearances and movements for things like that? You can see down here the stainless steel box which the fuel pumps sit in. There are 2 pumps, a main pump and an auxiliary pump, and they're in a fire protected stainless steel box. The main pump runs all the time, and the auxiliary pump is your backup pump. Here you'll see a fuel filter, and that is a special fuel filter for the IS engine. That filter is high volume. It's a fine micron filter. The reason it has to be high volume, as I mentioned earlier, because a fuel injection system requires a high flow rate of fuel across the fuel rail. And that doesn't mean that the engine burns a lot of fuel. The injectors take up very little of it, but that fuel needs to pass through rapidly through the engine and back to the header tank to assure good purging of the system of any air, gases, and adequate restart in the event of a shutdown. So back to the fuel system here. Fuel comes through the firewall from the fuel selector valve into this, right in here. The sediment trap, the backside of the sediment trap goes through the firewall. You can see it's well supported here with a bracket. The clearance here is critical, again, for crashworthiness. We want to make sure that we don't damage our sediment trap and cause a breach in the fuel system. So it's strategically placed and designed in such a way that it can give and bend a bit without causing any shear to any fuel system items. One thing that we see, Rotax has a very dedicated service towards accident investigation. They take accident investigation very, very seriously because there's always something to be learned from an accident. And we do a lot of research into what the cause of accidents might be. And we see a lot of things that could be resolved. It's unfortunate when people have a minor mishap And that minor mishap, because of poor design, leads to a breach in the fuel system and ultimately a fire. And people become injured when it's not necessary. So we take that very seriously. We're very conscious of that, and so the design team was very careful to make sure that they took all those factors into consideration to add as much safety to the design as possible. So back on the sediment trap, its location is very, very strategic with the crashworthiness in mind. It runs through to the feed into the fuel pump box, runs through the main and auxiliary pump, and then out to the bottom of the fuel filter. Now, on the sediment trap, this is not just a normal sediment trap, and that's a very important issue. Again, because of the high volume of fuel that moves through the fuel system, you have to have fine mesh fuel screens that have a very high volume capacity. In the event that you were to get a bad batch of fuel, you want fuel filters that don't become immediately blocked. So you've got to make sure that you use a stainless steel pleated filter with a very high volume capacity for contaminants, so that you don't block off the fuel system. And this sediment trap is designed to meet that requirement. So the sediment trap runs a certain mesh filter, a little coarser than what you get on the actual fuel filter. Fuel filter is a finer mesh again, so there's a two-phase filtering system basically that you're going through. Now, this is a fuel pressure sending unit here, and it talks to the engine monitoring unit. This particular aircraft, we chose to go to the stock flight systems engine monitoring unit because it has a lot of benefits and features and works very well with the 912IS engine. And one of the advantages is it will tell the pilot well before it becomes a critical issue that his fuel filter is becoming clogged. And it uses that by rationalizing flow and pressure, and it can tell that the fuel filter is starting to be filled with contaminants, and it gives the pilot lots of opportunity to change the filter before it could ever become an issue. Another important factor the design team had to consider is building a bypass system. This line here is a bypass that goes back into the return line. And the reason you have a bypass with an orifice in it is twofold. One is to help purge any gas bubbles or air that might be in the system to get a faster prime of the pumps and repressurize the system for a restart. And the second reason for this fuel system runs between 40 and 45 psi is its normally regulated area of operation. If you don't have a bypass like this with an orifice, when you shut down the engine, the check valves that are in the fuel pumps will cause, and the fuel regulator check valve will cause fuel pressure to become trapped into the fuel system. So again, for crashworthiness, when the prop stops turning, you want all the pressure, this 40 to 45 psi pressure, purged out of the system. So if in fact you do breach a line, you don't end up with a pressurized fuel leak. Second to that, when maintenance comes along and they want to crack the filter to change at any of the lines here or on the fuel rail, they don't have 45 psi pressure behind those fuel lines. So this is a very, very important part of the design criteria to meet, again, the safety goals that the design team was looking at. So when we carry on, we have the, out of the fuel filter, we run to the fuel rail. The fuel rail feeds the injectors on the right side of the engine, goes across, feeds the injectors on the left side of the engine, through the fuel regulator, and then into the return line, and the return line runs back here and then through the firewall. So the design is very simple once it's put into practice, but achieving a simple design actually takes a lot of really careful engineering when you got to take into factor crashworthiness and restarts, the vapor situation.
For more information on Zenith Zenair Build Center Skytek, visit their website at www.skytechaircraft.ca. If you have any comments on our Builder Series videos, email us at rotaxbuilderseries@rotax-owner.com.